my name is Joe. So I'm from Adyen, part of our Unified Commerce Enablement team. In today's presentation, I'm going to speak to you a little bit about what Unified Commerce is and deep dive a little bit more into payments data. So as Jimmy mentioned, Adyen is a financial service platform which helps merchants process their payments from start to finish. So everything from actually processing payments to eventually paying those out to our merchants. So I thought it'd be great just to do a bit of an intro in terms of what Adyen is before I dive into Unified Commerce. So Unified Commerce, what does it mean? There's so many buzzwords out there, omnichannel, etc. So I think just to describe it, what it means for us is that merchants who have an interaction or some sort of presence in store or online, or even through other multiple channels like call centers, for example, are merchants that we classify as Unified Commerce merchants. Now, typically what we'll find is that merchants will start in that single platform. Traditionally, they'll start moving into that kind of omni-channel setup whereby they have interactions in store, they have interactions online. But what we'll find is that when it take a look at the data and the actual transactional data itself and data in terms of customers, that tends to be quite siloed. And that's purely down to the fact that there are legacy platforms, legacy systems, which limit the fact they can't actually share that data across. So what that means for customers is that they have like a bit of a disjointed and not a great actual experience. For example, things like buying online and returning in store. So when we talk about Unified Commerce, it really is a focus on the back end. So focusing on kind of systems which are in place, so for example, order management systems, ERP platforms, customer data platforms are really there to kind of make sure that our payment data really supports supplementing that and basically providing a bit more of a visibility and single visibility on shoppers. So when we take a look at Unified Commerce, what we try to focus on is three main focus areas. The first one is around experiences, which is really focused on how do we make better customer journeys. So as I mentioned before, things like buying online and returning in store is one of them. But of course, you may have seen in the last couple of years, things like payment links, the use of self-serving checkouts, you may have seen in Uniqlo, for example. That all bundles under the kind of bucket of experiences. The second is insights. And again, I'm going to deep dive a little bit more into insights throughout this presentation, but that really is more understanding on shopper insights and deep diving into who is the customer behind the actual payment itself. And then lastly is engagement, which I'm not going to touch upon too much in this presentation. It really is focusing on how we boost interactions and personalization for shoppers, typically through things like our payment hardware. So things like recognition and shopper loyalty, as well as charitable donations, are all under our engagement package. Cool, so I'm going to jump straight into insights. And with shopper insights, what I want you to take a look at this screen here is a bit of a mock-up of what a typical point-of-sale merchant looks like. Typically, what you'll find is that there's a big percentage of unknown shoppers because, of course, many of us have done this before. We go into a store, we just want to be in and out. We don't want to provide any details. We don't want to interact with anyone. We just want to get our goods and go. But I do have a small portion of known shoppers. And typically, yes, it's down to the fact they have a loyalty program with them or a quick search on email address or phone number to allow them to search them up really quickly on the point of sale. So as you can see, that's not great. It looks like about an 80-20% split here. How Adyen's payment data really does support and I guess unlock those customers is through a couple of different points. Now, of course, name, email address, very obvious, unique identifying points for shoppers, very dependent on shoppers actually providing this information to them with consent, of course. But what I want to focus our time today here on is the two that you see, which is called the alias and the par. Now, the alias, essentially what we call card alias, is a unique identifier that we create at Adyen for each individual 16-digit or 15-digit card number. So, for example, if I use my card online or I use my card in store, I will be having the same alias and essentially being able to recognize me as a shopper across those different channels. Then you have annoying people like me who love to use Apple Pay on my watch and my Apple Pay on my phone or Google Pay on my phone. And essentially the whole point of those payment methods and wallet methods are obviously to mask my identity and mask my PAN. So for each device that gets created, each device that's used, a new card number is then created. So this is where we use what's called a PAR, or most commonly known as a payment account reference, which is a scheme-driven identifier that basically we get back from these schemes for the overarching account, right? So my bank account number and sort code in the UK isn't changing. Of course, my cards change, over 10 years, and my phone's changed over the space of time, but that remains the same. So by using these identifiers, what we're trying to see here and what we do end up getting is more of an understanding and more visibility on actual shoppers. And so this crowd of nice avatars here starts to become a little bit better, and you start recognizing these shoppers. Now, what that looks like from a merchant side, and this is a very basic mock-up of a database, by the way, no database looks like this. But what you see obviously from a merchant side is that you have a lot of information on your transactions, right? You have the date, you have the channel, of course you have the products, which is also super important. And in some cases, you may have the name and email address, right? Of course, if the customer is providing that and consenting to that information being passed over. But what I want to draw your attention to is, of course, the transaction number 2 and number 3, where on app and on a website, of course, customers are providing more data, right? They want their goods to be delivered to their home address. You need to provide a confirmation of email, for example. So they're more inclined to provide this information, and of course, consent to that data being given to you as a merchant. So let's just remember this, and let's take a look at what we see today in terms of customer profiles. If you take a look at Max, for example, we can see today that his order count is 1. Currently, what we see his lifetime value being is €100, and we only see him as a website shopper. We then took a look at the other shoppers, which are the unknown shoppers who haven't got any sort of name or email address associated to them. And all we're seeing is there's 3 shoppers, 3 transactions, and this is the total amount. We don't know nothing about the transactions themselves. But when we start to add in payment data, what we're able to do is start linking those shoppers together, right? So really understanding those blind spots and essentially associating transactions to known shoppers. So if we take a look at transaction 1, where we didn't have a name, we had no email address, but we take a look at the shopper identifier, A123, we see A123 is also used by Max. And so therefore, Max actually done a transaction in a store a few months back, and we're able to link those 2 together. So really understanding that kind of in-store shopper who never made themselves known or never presented themselves as part of that transaction, right? And as part of that customer profile. I also do want to draw attention to the last 2 transactions, right? Regardless of whether the fact that we have the name or email address, I think this type of data is still really good for you to have, right? To do anonymous marketing or anonymous targeting, because we're still seeing here that C789, a shopper used this with their MasterCard and then also used it on their MasterCard with Apple Pay as well. So if we take a look again back at the customer profiles, we now can see that Max, his order count increased, of course. His lifetime value is also increased. But I think most importantly, what we're now seeing is that not only is a website shopper, but he's also an omni-channel shopper, right? So he's shopping across multiple platforms. Not only is he fixed on shopping online. So essentially what we want to do is turn payments into profiles. There are various different ways in which Adyen can support in actually getting this data to you. One of the first ways of actually doing it is for using webhook notifications, which is, I'm not going to go super technical on everyone here, but by providing basic information about the transaction after every payment that goes through. So we can send that to you as merchants. You can consume that data. You can, of course, analyze that data and assign it towards your customer data platforms yourselves. The second way, however, is that we do have various amount of products which offer out-of-the-box functionality, right? And the whole purpose of this is that we remove that technical burden, meaning that you don't have to start sorting and analyzing profiles together. We'll do what I just showed in that example around creating the actual profiles. So we will stitch together your point-of-sale transactions and your e-commerce transactions into a file in which you can then eventually push into your own kind of customer data platforms and enrich your customer data, right? So the whole purpose of that is to simply ingest it and associate to your own CRM profile IDs and loyalty ID numbers. And eventually, hopefully what you can do with that data is actually execute on it, right? You can use it for marketing purposes. That's been mainly the use case that we've seen today from merchants, that they really want to use it for marketing. But as I was saying to you earlier, right, there's various different cases for verticals around fraud and how to stop loss prevention, for example. But essentially, these are just a few examples of how you can use it today, right? So for paid media or just understanding more customer lifetime value of your current shoppers. Now, I spoke a lot about customer lifetime value and customer profiling, but I think also one of the good examples that we've seen is that payment data actually supports operations as well. And I think this is a really nice example from one of our merchants who came with us with a bit of an ask, which was to understand more around their shopper behaviors in their kind of vertical, right, which is the hospitality and entertainment space. So Merlin, not too sure if you, for those who don't know, Merlin have amusement parks and theme parks across the world, and particularly in the UK, they have the likes of Thorpe Park and Chessington. They came to us and said, you know, we really want to understand more around guests once they enter the theme park. We don't know how long they spend in the theme park. We don't know what their favorite rides are. We don't know what they're purchasing. Do you have any sort of information to help us? So I took it upon myself and had a nice day out in Thorpe Park, and it was great. I had a great time. And this doesn't mean anything to you guys, but I'll walk you through exactly what this is. But essentially, these are all my transactions. These are all my transactions from the day in Thorpe Park. And there's a mixture here of point of sale and food and beverage, applications, online, kiosks for fast track tickets. And I just want to highlight, right? So it doesn't matter what systems you're using. You could be using point of sale solution, an online solution, a call center, or a food and beverage application. Adyen being that kind of payment platform and that single platform allows us to have that visibility on you as a shopper. And so obviously, yes, I use my same card for the purpose of the presentation and for the purpose of the example. But it's a really good way to actually start building that customer profile itself. And so what we did with this, we actually turned it into a bit of a payment timeline, right? So what we're able to use is understand exactly what my steps were, where I transacted throughout the day. So if we take a look at my ticket purchase, which took place on the 15th of July, you can then see that I visited the theme park about just over a week, just before opening time, so very keen to get on them rides, as you can see. And I made subsequent payments throughout the day, right? And I want to highlight the point around, I just didn't use my card. I used my iPhone, I used my Apple Watch, I used contactless, chip and pin. I tried everything to try and break the system, but apparently it just doesn't break. But not only am I able to see where I'm spending and what I'm spending during the day, but it gives me a bit of an approximate time of how long I spent in the park, right? Which is what Merlin wanted. They had no idea how long someone spends in their theme parks. And so the next slide gets a little bit creepier and a bit intrusive, but you can start to map out a little bit of my actual timeline and my actual whereabouts on the day, right? So in Merlin's case, not only did they use that data for looking at my profile and building my kind of CRM data itself, but they also took a look at this and thought, okay, well, Joe's going in here, he's going to the second point, his third point, he's buying a fast track ticket. Why don't we put more kiosks in between 1 and 2, right? So not only can they make decisions around customer, but more also around operations. And again, this is very specific to hospitality and entertainment, but of course, it's very much replicable in around retail and other verticals that we process in. So that's a nice example of how you can actually use it in practice. Now, I kind of want to end it on, we want to partner with data. When it comes to partnering with data, I think it's really important to consider things like data protection and privacy. GDPR is huge, of course. And I think our advice to that is always, be very transparent with your merchants about what you're using that data, your customers about what you're using that data for. If you want to do things like card link loyalty and using it for recognition purposes, as long as you're super transparent, of course, you check out your own legal teams, that's the best way forward. But of course, any questions around data or how Adyen works with merchants today, we're more than happy to share. So me and my colleagues are here, so feel free to reach out to us during the event.